The flickering candlelight danced across the faces gathered for Hanukkah, painting shadows that stretched and shrank with each breath. The air hung thick with the familiar scent of latkes and the low hum of conversation, a comfort I'd known since childhood. My eyes, as always, drifted to the grand menorah, polished brass gleam sitting center stage. It wasn't just metal to me, it was a connection, a story etched in time, passed down through generations. Then, Elder Gideon cleared his throat, a sound that always commanded attention. He stood beside the menorah, his usually kind face taking on a strange, almost dismissive expression. "Friends," he began, his voice smooth and deep, "tonight we celebrate, and as we do, let us not cling to old fables. This," he gestured vaguely at the ancient candelabrum, "is merely a symbol. Its so-called ancient lineage, its historical significance. Much of it is, shall we say, embellished, fabricated even, a story to make us feel important perhaps, but not true history." The words hit me like a cold wave. Fabricated? This menorah, the very heart of our celebration, the one my grandfather had taught me about, tracing its lines with his weathered finger? It felt like a punch to the gut, a betrayal not just of history, but of every cherished memory tied to it. My hands, resting on my lap, clenched into fists. I felt a tremor, but kept my face still. Around me, people shifted. Some nodded, trusting Gideon implicitly. Others exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke. No one challenged him. I waited until the murmurs died down, until Gideon had turned to light the first candle, his back momentarily to me. Slowly, carefully, I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. My fingers brushed against the worn leather of a small flat book. It wasn't a book for public display, not anymore. This was something older, something hidden. I pulled it out, just enough to feel its weight, its brittle pages pressing against my palm. It was an old text, handwritten, passed down through my family alongside the menorah itself. It contained detailed drawings, notations, and stories about the menorah's journey, its true history. It was a silent counter-argument to Gideon's casual dismissal. I didn't open it, didn't make a sound. I just held it, letting its presence speak for me. As Gideon turned back, the first candle now lit, his eyes met mine across the room. For a split second, the easy smile he wore for the community faltered. His gaze dropped to my hand, to the faint outline of the book beneath my coat. He saw it. He knew what it was. A flicker of something, recognition, irritation, maybe even a hint of something darker, crossed his face, quickly masked by his public persona. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He said nothing, simply continued with the blessing, his voice unwavering. But the air had changed. The warmth of the celebration was still there, but now a thin, almost invisible current of tension snaked through the room. A silent challenge laid bare between us. I felt the weight of the old text in my hand, its fragile pages holding more than just ink. They held a promise of vindication, of truth. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. My earliest memories are steeped in the warmth of our small Jewish community, nestled in what felt like a timeless corner of the world. It wasn't a grand city, but a place where every face was familiar, every holiday a shared tapestry of tradition and joy. I can still close my eyes and smell the challah baking in the communal oven every Friday, its sweet, yeasty aroma filling the air, a signal that Shabbat was almost upon us. Hanukkah was a particularly special time, a burst of light and laughter against the winter chill. The stories told around the flickering menorah flames weren't just tales. They were living history, passed from one generation to the next, each word carrying the weight of centuries. Our faith wasn't just something we practiced on holidays, it was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. From the blessings over meals to the way we cared for our neighbors, everything felt connected to something bigger, something ancient and sacred. And at the heart of it all, for me, were the symbols. The Star of David on our synagogue, the intricate patterns on the Torah scrolls, and most importantly, the menorah. Not just any menorah, but our menorah. The one my grandfather had shown me, tracing its branches with his gnarled finger, telling me stories of its journey through time. It wasn't just an object, it was a connection to our ancestors, a tangible link to a past that felt as real as the present. That connection made me feel secure, part of something vast and enduring. It made me curious too. I spent hours in the synagogue library, poring over old texts, trying to understand the deeper meanings behind every symbol, every ritual. I loved the feeling of uncovering a hidden layer of history, of understanding why things were done the way they were. It was during these early years that Elder Gideon first took notice of me. He was a pillar of our community, charismatic, learned, and respected by everyone. He had a way of speaking that drew people in, making even complex ideas seem simple and profound. He saw my enthusiasm, my hunger for knowledge, and he encouraged it. He would invite me to sit with him, explaining passages of the Talmud, sharing anecdotes from Jewish history. He became a mentor, a guide, and I looked up to him immensely. I admired his wisdom, his ability to command a room, his seemingly endless knowledge. I trusted him completely. He often spoke of the importance of tradition, of honoring our heritage, and his words resonated deeply with my own feelings. He made me feel like I was part of something important, that my passion for our history was valuable. This early relationship, built on respect and admiration, laid a strong foundation. I believed in him, in his guidance, in his interpretation of our shared history. It never occurred to me that such a revered figure could ever steer me wrong. My vulnerability, I now realize, came from that very respect. My deep reverence for authority, for the wisdom of our elders, made me susceptible. I was so eager to learn, so eager to be part of the tradition, that I perhaps didn't question enough. I saw Gideon as a guardian of our history, not someone who would ever seek to redefine or diminish it. His influence was pervasive, shaping not just my understanding of our faith, but also my sense of self within the community. He was the voice of authority, and I, like many others, listened without reservation. This made the casual dismissal of the Menorah and its history even more jarring, even more personal. It wasn't just a challenge to a historical fact, it felt like a challenge to my very identity, to everything I had been taught to cherish. Over the years, these subtle cracks began to appear in our relationship. Small at first, almost unnoticeable, but they grew. It wasn't an overnight change, but a slow, steady chipping away at the trust and admiration I had for Elder Gideon. At first, it was just small comments. I would share some new insight I found in an old text, something about the deeper meaning of a particular symbol or a lesser-known historical detail, and he would wave it off. He'd say things like, "Oh, that's just academic fluff, my boy. We don't need to overthink these things. The simple truth is enough." Or, "You're spending too much time in dusty books. Practical faith is what truly matters." It started to feel like he was belittling my scholarly pursuits, dismissing my research into the deeper meanings of ancient symbols as overthinking or unnecessary. I remember once, I was very excited about a connection I found between a specific medieval commentary and a passage in the Mishnah, showing how an ancient custom had evolved. I presented it to him, hoping for his usual encouraging words, but he just chuckled. "You'll confuse yourself with too many interpretations," he said. "Just stick to what's clear." It wasn't outright cruel, but it felt like a cold shower on my enthusiasm, a dampening of my intellectual fire. Then came the instances of veiled humiliation. In community discussions, when I tried to contribute a point, perhaps referencing some historical context I'd learned, he would subtly undermine me. He wouldn't directly contradict me, but he'd often follow my statement with something like, "A young scholar here has a very active imagination, but let's get back to what truly matters for our congregation today." Or he'd simply ignore my contribution, moving the conversation along as if I hadn't spoken. These moments, small as they were individually, added up. They eroded my confidence, making me question whether my insights were truly valuable or if I was just being naive. I started to hesitate before speaking up, wondering if my words would just be met with another subtle put-down. There were also broken promises. We had talked about working together on a project to catalog some of the synagogue's older texts, a shared research opportunity that thrilled me. He'd mentioned it several times, making me feel like a valued partner. But then, when I brought it up, he'd always have an excuse. "Oh, busy with other things, perhaps next year," or "I've decided to go in a different direction with that." Eventually, the project just faded away, never happening, leaving me feeling marginalized and disappointed. It wasn't just the lost opportunity, it was the feeling of being strung along, of my time and interest not being respected. These weren't dramatic fights or open conflicts. They were quiet slights, subtle rejections, and dismissals that slowly chipped away at my self-worth. He was still my mentor, still a figure I respected deeply, but the foundation of that respect was cracking. I began to question my own understanding of our heritage. Was I truly overthinking things? Was my passion for historical detail misplaced? Was the simple truth he spoke of really all that mattered? I started to doubt my own instincts, my own years of study. I felt a growing sense of confusion, a nagging feeling that something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Looking back, I can see now that the public desecration of the Menorah in Part 1 wasn't an isolated incident at all. It was the culmination of years of this emotional wear and tear, a final public act that mirrored the private undermining I had experienced for so long. It wasn't just about a historical object. It was about authority, interpretation, and the right to define our shared past. The community's emotional atmosphere became increasingly strained, a quiet hum of unease beneath the surface of our daily lives. The elder, my former mentor, now seemed to hold even more sway, his voice dominant in every discussion. He started pushing for a more modern interpretation of our religious practices. He spoke of practicality, of relevance in a changing world, and while he never directly attacked tradition, he subtly marginalized those of us who held on to the older ways, including me. His words were always smooth, reasonable, making it hard to argue against them directly without sounding stubborn or out of touch. Discussions about the Hanukkah menorah, which used to be moments of shared reverence, slowly turned into battlegrounds for differing historical perspectives. He would present his theories, often with a selective presentation of facts, emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying or outright ignoring others. His arguments started gaining traction, fueled by his charisma and the general desire among some to move forward, to seem progressive. He talked about the menorah as a symbol of light, yes, but almost as if its historical journey, its specific design, its ancient lineage were just footnotes, unnecessary details that bogged down the true message. I felt the weight of judgment from some community members who began to align with him. They didn't say anything directly, but their glances, their hushed conversations made it clear. I was seen as rigid, perhaps overly academic, someone stuck in the past. It was a subtle pressure, but it was there, like a constant low-level hum of disapproval. I heard whispers that my focus on ancient texts and historical accuracy was missing the point, that I was more concerned with dusty books than with the living spirit of our faith. It was isolating, making me feel like an outsider in the very community I had always felt so deeply connected to. The social pressures mounted. The community, once a unified front, began to debate the true meaning of our symbols. Was it the ancient, unbroken chain of tradition, or a more flexible, adaptable interpretation? The elder presented his views as liberating, as a way to make our faith more accessible, more appealing to younger generations. He painted tradition as a burden, and those of us who defended it as obstacles to progress. I found myself feeling suffocated by this shifting tide of opinion. Every conversation felt charged. Every mention of history or ancient customs seemed to invite a sideways glance. I tried to articulate my concerns, to explain the importance of understanding the full context, the rich layers of meaning that came from centuries of unbroken tradition. But my words often fell flat, overshadowed by the elder's more persuasive, more modern-sounding rhetoric. He had a way of framing his arguments that made mine seem pedantic, even irrelevant. I remember trying to explain the specific historical context of a particular menorah design, and he just waved it off, saying, "That's all well and good for a historian, but for our community, the light is what matters, not the specific shape of the candle holder." It was a dismissal, not just of my point, but of my entire approach. This period was an emotional low point for me. I felt increasingly isolated, my voice seemingly lost in the growing chorus of those who supported the elder's vision. The security I had always found in my heritage, in the tangible connection to our past through symbols like the menorah, began to waver. It was like watching a foundation slowly crack, piece by piece, under the weight of new, unfamiliar forces. I questioned myself constantly, wondering if I was indeed the one who was wrong, too stubborn to see a new path. The community, my anchor, now felt like a place of silent judgment, and I was adrift, struggling to hold on to my beliefs in the face of such overwhelming pressure. This was the point where I felt truly alone before anything changed. The isolation and self-doubt were crushing, but something deep inside me refused to break completely. It was a stubborn flicker, a tiny bit of defiance that had been sparked by the elder's casual dismissal of the Menorah's history. That dismissive wave of his hand, the way he brushed off centuries of tradition as mere footnotes, had actually lit a fire in me. I realized I couldn't just stand by and watch our history be rewritten. I started digging, not just in our community archives, which I had already scoured, but in places I hadn't considered before. I spent late nights in dusty university libraries, poring over microfiche and forgotten journals. I reached out to scholars in other countries, people who specialized in the very specific historical period and regional variations of Hanukkah traditions that the elder claimed were insignificant. It was a painstaking process, often frustrating, with many dead ends. But I was driven by a new kind of urgency. This wasn't just about my research anymore. It felt like a mission to protect something vital. Then, one rainy Tuesday, I found it. Tucked away in a digitized collection of old personal letters from a small Jewish community in 17th century Eastern Europe, a collection that had only recently been made available online, was a series of correspondences between a rabbi and a scribe. They were discussing the very menorah design that the elder had called modern and unhistorical. The letters detailed the specific craftsmanship, the symbolic choices behind each branch and cup, and, most importantly, they referenced a much older text, an obscure commentary on the Book of Maccabees, that explicitly described a similar menorah used during a period the elder claimed had no such artifacts. It wasn't just a mention, it was a detailed description, complete with illustrations. This wasn't just one piece of evidence, it was a chain, each link strengthening the next. The letters directly contradicted the elder's assertions about the design's origins. The ancient commentary, in turn, proved that the core elements of the menorah he dismissed as fabricated were, in fact, deeply rooted in our earliest historical practices. It was undeniable. This wasn't some minor academic point. It was a complete refutation of his central argument. My hands trembled as I read, a mix of elation and a cold dread washing over me. The elder wasn't just mistaken, he was actively misrepresenting our history, whether intentionally or through sheer ignorance. This discovery was a profound revelation. It validated everything I had believed, everything I had been taught, and everything I had felt in my gut was true. It exposed the flimsy foundation of his claims, the careful selection of facts he had used to build his narrative. I knew in that moment that I couldn't keep this to myself. The implications were too big. This wasn't just about me or my bruised ego. It was about the integrity of our community's history, about the trust placed in those who lead us. Presenting this evidence would be huge. It would mean directly challenging someone powerful, someone revered. It would certainly cause a stir, maybe even a schism. I pictured the elder's face, the confident smirk, the way he held sway over the community. The thought of confronting him was terrifying. But the alternative, letting his misrepresentation stand, letting our history be distorted, was even worse. The weight of that decision settled on me, heavy and clear. I would have to present this. I would have to show them the truth. The cycle of my suffering, the constant questioning of my own understanding, was about to be shattered. The story was about to take a very different turn. The immediate aftermath of my discovery felt like walking through thick fog. There was a strange mix of fear and an almost giddy sense of relief. The truth, raw and undeniable, was finally in my hands. But presenting it, especially against someone as respected as the elder, was a daunting prospect. My mind raced, picturing the faces of the community members, how they would react. Some would undoubtedly rally around me, their own quiet doubts finally affirmed. Others, those who had always deferred to the elder's authority, would likely react with anger or disbelief, perhaps even seeing me as a disruptive force. The cultural dynamics of our community were always complex. We had those who clung fiercely to the oldest traditions, seeing any deviation as a betrayal. Then there were others who embraced more modern interpretations, eager to adapt and evolve. The elder had skillfully positioned himself between these groups, often presenting his modern views while still nodding to tradition, making his arguments seem balanced and authoritative. My evidence, however, wasn't about interpretation. It was about facts, about historical record. It cut through the nuance he had so carefully cultivated. I spent days reviewing the documents, cross-referencing, verifying every detail. I wanted no room for doubt. During this time, a quiet support emerged from an unexpected corner. Old Mendel, a man rarely seen outside his small bookstore, a man known more for his silence than his opinions, came to me. He simply placed a dusty, leather-bound volume on my desk. It was an even older commentary, one I hadn't seen, with marginalia that subtly echoed the very points I was making. He didn't say much, just a nod and a knowing look. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a powerful affirmation. His quiet support was a balm to my frayed nerves. Then there was young Sarah, one of the more progressive voices in the community. She was sharp, always questioning, always pushing for transparency. When I cautiously shared my findings with her, she didn't hesitate. Her initial skepticism quickly turned to firm conviction. She saw the evidence for what it was, a clear historical correction, not just an academic debate. She immediately understood the implications for our community's integrity and offered to help me present the case, suggesting ways to frame the information that would resonate with different factions. Her energy was infectious, a much-needed contrast to my own cautious approach. But not everyone was so receptive. David, a staunch supporter of the elder, a man who had always viewed him as a personal mentor, became an unexpected obstacle. When I tried to explain my findings to him, he would shut down, his face hardening. He saw my actions not as a quest for truth, but as a personal attack on the elder, a sign of disrespect. He dismissed my evidence as academic nitpicking and unnecessary trouble. He kept saying, "The elder knows best. He has guided us for years. Why stir up old bones?" His loyalty was absolute, and it was clear that no amount of historical proof would sway him. He became a vocal skeptic, sowing seeds of doubt among those who were already hesitant. The psychological impact on me was profound. One moment, I felt a surge of strength, knowing I had the truth on my side. The next, a wave of anxiety would wash over me, fearing the divisions I was creating. The weight of newfound respect from some was exhilarating, yet the lingering animosity from others was a heavy burden. Every conversation felt charged. Every glance seemed to hold judgment. I felt the reverberations of my actions echoing through the community, a ripple effect that had only just begun. I was no longer just a scholar. I was a catalyst, and the path ahead was uncertain, filled with both potential vindication and unavoidable conflict. The air in the community hall was thick with anticipation. The day of the formal presentation of my findings had arrived. I stood before the community, a mix of faces looking back at me, some expectant, some wary, some openly hostile. Old Mendel sat in the front row, a small, encouraging smile on his face. Sarah was by my side, ready to help manage the projector with the scans of the ancient texts. The elder, surprisingly, was also there, seated stoically in the back, his usual place of honor now occupied by others. He looked smaller than I remembered, his usual charisma dimmed. I began to speak, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I laid out the evidence piece by piece, starting with the earliest historical records, moving through the archaeological findings, and finally presenting the forgotten family records that explicitly detailed the Menorah's true origins and its symbolic significance. I showed them the marginalia from Mendel's commentary, which perfectly aligned with the newly discovered documents. Sarah navigated the digital presentation seamlessly, highlighting key passages, zooming in on ancient script, making the centuries-old words come alive. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the weight of the evidence became undeniable. Faces shifted from skepticism to understanding, then to something akin to awe. Some wiped away tears. David, the elder's staunch supporter, initially tried to interrupt, muttering about disrespect, but his voice was quickly drowned out by others who shushed him, their attention fixed on the screen. He eventually fell silent, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. When I finished, there was a profound silence, followed by a ripple of applause that slowly built into a wave. People approached me, some with apologies, some with questions, many with heartfelt thanks. The elder remained in his seat, watching the scene unfold. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Later, I heard he had quietly left the hall, and for weeks he was conspicuously absent from community gatherings. He never made a public retraction, but his influence waned significantly. His modern interpretations, once so compelling, now seemed hollow, built on a foundation of misdirection. He slowly withdrew from community life, a quiet withdrawal, but a withdrawal nonetheless. The community, though bruised by the deception, began the arduous process of healing. There were difficult conversations, moments of reckoning, but also a renewed sense of purpose. We re-evaluated our past, not just the history of the Menorah, but how we had allowed ourselves to be swayed, how we had prioritized comfort over truth. The ancient Menorah, once a point of contention, was now re-established as a symbol of enduring heritage, its true history acknowledged and celebrated with a fervor I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just a symbol of light anymore, it was a symbol of resilience, of truth prevailing. I found myself taking on a new role, not just as a scholar, but as a guide. People came to me with questions about other traditions, other symbols. They wanted to dig deeper, to understand the authentic roots of their faith. Mendel, in his quiet way, became a frequent visitor, sharing insights from his vast personal library. Sarah, with her progressive outlook, helped bridge the gap between tradition and modern understanding, ensuring that the lessons learned were integrated into our contemporary practices. Standing before the menorah during the next Hanukkah, its flames dancing brightly, I reflected on the journey. It had been a painful one, filled with doubt and conflict, but ultimately it had led to a deeper truth. The importance of truth, I realized, wasn't just about historical accuracy. It was about the integrity of our community, the strength of our faith, and the power of our shared story. The ancient symbols, once taken for granted, now held a renewed resonance, reminding us that while interpretations might shift, the core truths, when diligently sought, would always illuminate the way. The story had come full circle, and the light of the menorah shone brighter than ever before, a beacon of authenticity and enduring heritage.